We're talking about my last
Larry Elder.
father, dear son, 2 lives, 8 hours. I'll explain the subtitle in just a second. So I'm 15 years old, and my dad yelled at me for something. I don't remember what it was. And I went in the back. I took off my apron. I set it down, and I thought long and hard about walking out because I knew what the consequences were going to be. I walked out. I took the bus home. Now keep in mind, this was a restaurant that seated 16 people, and during the lunch hour there might be 5, 10 people standing room only because they would order things to take out. And I walked out when we did not have a waitress that day. Normally we had one waitress, sometimes two with us. This time my dad and I were alone. I can't remember why. I think maybe the waitress had phoned in sick. So I left him with a restaurant full of people during the height of rush hour. Not too surprisingly, when my dad came home, he was furious. Now, he paid me $10 a day plus tips. He balled up the $10. I was laying on my bed, just thinking about what I was going to say to him when he came in. I decided to be there as opposed to just going somewhere and hopefully my dad would come home and go to sleep. I thought about doing that, but I thought against it. I thought I would just hear what he had to say and we'd have it out. So he came into my room and he said, "Why did you leave?" And I said, "I was sick and tired of the way you spoke to me." And my dad took the $10, he balled it up, he threw it at me, he turned around, and he walked out. And I'm telling you, my father and I did not have another conversation for 10 years. And when I say did not have a conversation, I mean did not have a conversation. I mean we didn't even say, "How about those Rams?" who at the time were in L.A. Or, "Don't you think it's going to rain?" Nothing. And it was fairly easy for me to avoid talking to him because he came home late. He got up early, came home late. And I was able to just avoid, we had a very tiny house, I was just able to avoid ever seeing him. And then 2 years later, I graduate from high school. I go away to the East Coast to college. I then go away to the Midwest to law school. And I take a job at a law firm in Ohio. And so for all these years, my dad and I did not speak. I am in college 4 years. We didn't speak. I'm in law school 3 years. We didn't speak. I would come home for summers, and I would come home for Christmas breaks, and we still would not say a word to each other. It was awkward sometimes, but I still had intense bitterness towards him. And I felt maybe the reverse was true. And I really didn't much care. So I'm now practicing law, and I'm 25 years old. 10 years have now passed. And I'm having difficulty sleeping. And I wasn't quite sure why. I didn't call a shrink or anything like that. But I began having dreams about him. Things he said to me, things he'd done to me that I didn't like. And so I figured my restlessness, my inability to sleep, had something to do with my dad. So I called my secretary one morning, and I told her to cancel all of my appointments for the next 3 days if I was going to L.A. I had to put out a fire. Normally, when I come home, of course, I would call my mom and my dad and tell them that I was going to be there. They would greet me at the airport. My mother would greet me at the airport. My dad did not. But I didn't call. I took a cab from the airport to my dad's cafe. He closed at 2:30. I got there at 1:30. I walk in with 2 bags, and my dad, of course, was surprised. And I said, "I want to talk to you." He said, "Fine. Shall I put your bags in the back?" I said, "No, I'm only going to be here for about 5 or 10 minutes, Dad." He said, "Okay, wait until we close." So I sat there for an hour on a stool watching him and watching the waitress named Francine, who worked for him for a very long period of time. And I always thought it was remarkable how Francine was not intimidated by my dad. My dad, in fact, would defer to her, would ask her questions, would ask her what she thought. He never did that with us. And I wasn't sure what to make of it. It didn't bother me as much as I felt that there must be a side to him that somehow I could not figure out the code to, the combination to. And she had. And she worked for him for years. And so as I'm sitting there watching him, I'm trying to figure out what to say. And I thought about it on the flight. The flight's almost a 4.5-hour flight from Cleveland to LA. So I had plenty of time to think about what I was going to say to him. And what I decided that I was going to do was to be calm, just to make sure I didn't blow up. Make sure that I told him in a calm, even way what it was that bothered me about him, why it was I thought he punished us so severely, why it was that I became so almost hateful towards him. And I thought about some of the things that he had done and said the time we went on the 4th of July, and there was stadium parking, so the car was surrounded when we parked. And after we saw the 4th of July fireworks, we came back to the car, and because it was surrounded by so many cars, my dad said he's going to take a nap, and he put a hat on his face as he was trying to sleep. And playfully, I picked up the hat and just looked at him, and my dad started screaming at me for picking up the hat off his face. This is the kind of thing that I just did not understand. I thought about that as I was sitting there. I thought about the time we went to Disneyland, and my dad went on the roller coaster and somehow got a crook in his neck. And he was complaining the whole time we were at Disneyland about how he couldn't move his neck, to the point where none of us had a good time because my dad was complaining all the time.